Alright, we're like halfway through chapter 2, starting with emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman defines emotional intelligence as our ability to successfully recognize and manage our own feelings, and to healthily respond to the feelings of others. As implied above, I believe the quality of our emotional intelligence is reflected in the degree to which we accept all of our feelings without automatically disassociating from them or expressing them in a way that hurts ourselves and others. When we are emotionally intelligent, we also extend this acceptance to our intimates. One of the clients calls this the hallmark of relationships. Another way of saying this is that I have self-esteem to the degree that I keep my heart open to myself in all my emotional states. And I have intimacy when my friend and I offer this type of emotional acceptance to each other. Once again, this does not condone destructive expression of anger, which are, of course, counterproductive to trust and intimacy. CPTSD engendering parents often hypocritically attack their children's emotional expression in a bimodal way. This occurs when the child is both abused for emoting and is at the same time abused by her caretaker. Toxic emotional expression. Most traumatizing parents are especially contemptuous towards the child's expression of emotional pain. This contempt then forces the child's all-important capacity for healthy grieving into developmental arrest. One archetypal example of this is seen when the parent who hurts his child to the point of tears and then has the nerve to say, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." A client once told me that he often fantasized about giving his father the angry reply, "What are you talking about? You already gave me something to cry about." He did not, however, because he had long since learned that getting angry back was capital crime, and that would elicit the most savage retaliation. Typically, it would be delivered with homicidal rage. "I'll knock you from here to kingdom come." The above is, of course, a blatant example of the slaughtering of emotional expression. Just as common is the insidious passive-aggressive assault on emoting, which is seen in the parent who shuns her child for expressing his feelings. This is seen in the emotionally abandoning parent who sequesters the child in a timeout for crying, or routinely retreats from the crying child into her room. The worst, most damaging example of this occurs when this is done to the pre-verbal toddler, or baby, who only has emotions with which to express herself. Pre-verbal children are by definition far too young to learn the 2 to 3 year old's developmental task of using her words to communicate about feelings. An especially nasty form of emotional abuse occurs in the traumatizing family when the child is even being attacked for displaying pleasant emotions. As I write this, I flash back to scenes of my mother sneering at me, my little sister, and snarling, "What are you so happy about?" And my father's frequent, "What are you laughing at? Wipe that smile off your face." Emotional abuse is also almost always accompanied by emotional abandonment, which can most simply be described as a relentless lack of parental warmth and love. Sometimes this is most poignantly described as not being liked by your parents, which belies the many CPTSD-inducing parents who say they love their children but demonstrate in 1,000 ways that they do not like them. "The sight of you makes me sick" was very popular with such parents when I was growing up. It can still bring tears to my eyes to remember my emotionally abandoned younger sister secreted in the corner of the house begging our family dog, "Like me, Ginger, like me." Toxic shame and soul murder. The rejecting responses of our parents to our emotional expression alienate us from our feelings. Emotional abuse neglect scares us out of our own emotions while simultaneously making us terrified of other people's feelings. John Bradshaw describes the devastation of the child's emotional nature as a soul murder. He explains this as an involving a process where the child's emotional expression, his first language of self-expression, is so assaulted with disgust that any emotional experience immediately devolves into toxic shame. I believe the toxic shame is the effect of the inner critic, and that inner critic thought processes are the cognitions of shame, a terrible yin-yang process emanating from our original abandonment. I believe that toxic shame is the effect of the inner critic, and that inner critic thought processes are the cognitions of shame, a terrible yin-yang process emanating from our original abandonment. Because of the deadly 1-2 punch of familial and societal attacks on our emotional selves, we need to recover our innate emotional intelligence. This is also deeply important because, as Carl Jung emphasized, our emotions tell us what is really important to us. When our emotional intelligence is restricted, we often do not know what we really want, and can consequently struggle mightily with even the smallest decisions. As emotional recovery progresses, the mindfulness described above begins to extend towards our emotional experience. This helps us to stop automatically disassociating from our feelings. We then learn to identify our feelings and choose healthy ways to respond to them and from them. Such emotional development illuminates our own natural preferences, and in turn aids us in making easier and better choices. Towards the end of a long-term therapy, a male client told me, "Yesterday I was contemplating what I have discovered in the years of our work together, and I'm amazed at how much of my values have shifted away from those of the macho family and a culture I grew up in." And I'm amazed at how much my values have shifted away from those of the macho family and culture I grew up in. I feel now like I prefer the arts to science, novels to nonfiction, gardening to watching golf, and hanging out with my partner at home to partying at the bar. Grieving as emotional intelligence. Grieving is the key process for reconnecting with our repressed emotional intelligence. Grieving reconnects us with our full complement of feelings. Grieving is necessary to help us release and work with our pain about the terrible losses of our childhood. These losses are like deaths of parts of ourselves, and grieving can often initiate their rebirth. Grieving and verbal ventilation. Grieving restores our crucial developmentally arrested capacity to verbally ventilate. Verbal ventilation is the penultimate grieving practice. It is speaking from our feelings in a way that releases and resolves our emotional distress. I believe the following description of a 6-panel cartoon visually conveys the powerful, transformative power of verbal ventilation. In the first panel of the wordless cartoon, a woman with a dark cloud over her head is talking to a friend who has a shining sun over hers. In panel 2, as the first woman gestures in a way that indicates complaining, the cloud covers her friend's sun. In panel 3, the cloud emits a bolt of lightning as she angrily purges, and her friend glowers along with her. In panel 4, the cloud rains on them as they embrace, commiserating in the rain of their shared tears. In panel 5, relief spreads over their faces as the cloud moves away from the sun. In panel 6, the sun shines over both of them as they smile and slip into pleasant conversation. The cartoon reflects the fully realized power of verbal ventilation, which is the key bonding process in intimacy. It is also the key healing process of effective therapy, and there is an example of what verbal ventilation looks like in a therapy session. A client arrives flashbacked and in pain. He verbally ventilates about it. He is the regressed, hurt child. Feeling bad, and part of him is sad and part of him is mad. He is once again lost in the painful feelings of his original abandonment. And this state is like a death that responds well to grieving. As he lets out his feelings come into his voice, he talks, cries, and angers out his pain. Through his processing of his pain, he then gradually moves out of his flashback. He is restored to his normal everyday sense that he is no longer trapped in his traumatic childhood. Relief about this returns him to his normal ability to cope. If his grieving is deep enough, he customarily feels more hopeful and lighthearted. Not infrequently, his sense of humor resurfaces and laughter punctuates his continual verbal ventilation. This laughter is usually much different than the sarcastic self-bullying humor of his critic that he might have begun the session with. The inner critic is sometimes so hostile to grieving that shrinking the critic may need to be your first recovery priority. Until the critic is sufficiently tamed, grieving can actually make flashbacks worse, rather than perform the restorative processes it alone can initiate. I have worked with numerous clients who were so traumatized around grieving that we needed to spend many months working on the cognitive level before grieving was released from the spoiling effects of the toxic critic. Chapter 11 provides a great deal of practical guidance for restoring your ability to grieve. Spiritual healing, soothing abandonment losses via a higher sense of belonging. Spiritual beliefs are, of course, a subject of personal and sometimes private concern. And I believe and hope that what I write here is not proselytizing. My aim instead is to point out our psychological concepts that have a non-sectarian spiritual aspect. I am aware, however, that some survivors have suffered terrible spiritual abuse in childhood, and the term spiritual is offensive or triggering in any way. Please feel free to bypass this section. There are many other useful tools in this toolbox. A key aspect of the abandonment, depression, and ptsd is the lack of a sense of belonging to humanity, life, anyone, or anything. I have met many survivors whose first glimmer of belonging came to them on a quest that began as a spiritual pursuit. Finding nothing but betrayal in the realm of humans, they turned to the spiritual for help. Spiritual pursuits are sometimes fueled by an unconscious hope of finding a sense of belonging. The worst thing that can happen to a child is to be unwelcomed in his family of origin, to never feel included. Moreover, many survivors have little or no experience of any social arena that feels safe and welcoming. Many survivors also do not find a sense of belonging in traditional or organized religions. Finding conventional religions too reminiscent of their dysfunctional family, many survivors look to more solitary spiritual approaches. They find a sense of belonging to something larger and more comforting by reading spiritual books or engaging in meditative practices. This also allows them to bypass the danger of direct human contact. Other survivors have spiritual experiences of belonging to something greater and worthwhile by being in nature, by listening to music, or by appreciating the arts. I once marveled at a book whose title now eludes me, that was a compendium of quotes from many renowned people who had numinous experiences through the direct perceptions of nature's beauty. A numinous experience is a powerful, moving feeling of well-being accompanied by a sense that there is a positive, benign force behind the universe, as well as within yourself. This, in turn, sometimes brings enough grace with it that you have a profound feeling that you are essentially worthwhile, that you belong in this life, and that life is a gift. One of my website respondents sent me her personal account of Therapeutic Gratitude. Her name is Mary Quinn of Ireland. In answer to my request to reprint her writing, she replied, "Yes, and in honor of my little one, and for all the times her voice went unheard, you may use my name." I went to the beach a couple of days ago in the morning and sat watching the sun coming up. I had an incredible moment of the pursuit of clarity. I was watching birds flying low over the water. The moon was still visible and the sun was rising. I realized I was looking at 3 planets and there was not another person in sight. It was a moment of breathtaking beauty, and the tears slid down my face at how deep it is possible to feel. I've been numb for so long. I wrapped my arms around myself and felt the presence of the little one so strongly. It was almost painful, but in a healing way, if that makes sense. I realized that all the life experiences I have had today brought me to this exact moment, and gave me the depth to appreciate it at that level. A sense of peace washed over me like a gentle wave for a few moments. I felt a connection to a feeling of everything being part of life. It was breathtakingly beautiful. I felt like I was experiencing this moment with all of my senses, and I never knew it was possible to be so much in my body. The gratitude feeling is deep and profound when it occurs. It feels like a moment of connection to life itself on the deepest level. And all life circumstances and what I deem as problems pale to insignificance in those moments, and there is only love in its purest form. It truly feels like a blessing, albeit fleeting, but gives enough sustenance and hope to continue the journey. Whatever the source, spiritual or numinous occurrences sometimes provide the survivor with their first sense of belonging to something bigger and essentially good. Such experiences can lead a survivor to an author or speaker or fellow traveler with similar sensibilities, and sometimes opens the door for finding comfort with a fellow human. Eventually, this may even grow into a sense that there are some humans out there who are good and safe enough to engage with. Gratitude and good enough parenting. When developing children receive good enough parenting, they feel that life is a gift, even though it typically comes with difficult and painful experiences. The term good enough parenting derives from the work of renowned adult and child psychologist D.W. Winnicott, who coined the term good enough mothering to describe his observation that children do not need parents to be perfect. He noticed through his long career that children grew up with their self-esteem and capacity for intimacy intact when their parents were reasonably consistent with their love and support. Nowadays, many therapists attach the phrase good enough to concepts like friend, partner, therapist, or person. This is usually done to deconstruct perfectionistic expectations of a relationship. Expectations that are so unrealistic that they are destructive to essentially worthwhile relationships. When I apply the concept of good enough to people, I generally mean that a person is essentially good-hearted, tries to be fair, and meets his or her commitments a large portion of the time. I also like to apply good enough to other people's concepts, such as good enough job, a good enough try, a good enough outing, a good enough day, or a good enough life. I apply this concept liberally to contradict the black and white, all or nothing thinking of the critic, which reflexively judges people and things as defective unless they are perfect. Good enough parents provide generous amounts of support, protection, and comforting. They also guide their children to deal constructively with recurring existential difficulties such as loss, real villains, painful world events, and normal disappointments with friends and family. Most importantly, they model how disappointments with intimates can be repaired. A key way to do this is to easily forgive their children for normal mistakes and shortcomings. Children who receive good enough parenting easily recognize and protect themselves from bullying and exploitive people because they do not have to become accustomed to being treated unfairly. They grow up in a safe and loving enough family naturally. Growing up in a safe and loving enough family naturally enhances the child's capacity to notice and enjoy the many gifts that life also brings. He learns that there is enough good in life to significantly outweigh its necessary losses and travails. In the traumatizing family, however, there is little or nothing that is good enough, and hence little for which to be grateful. The child instead is forced to overdevelop a critic that hyper-focuses on what is dangerously imperfect in her as well as others. This sometimes helps her to hide aspects of herself that might be punished. It may further assist her to avoid people who might be punishing. Unfortunately, years of this habituates the child into only seeing herself, life, and others in a negative light. Consequently, when she grows up and becomes free of her truly harmful family, she cannot see that life offers her many new possibilities. Her ability to see the good in herself and certain safe enough others remain developmentally arrested. The cultivation of gratitude requires a balanced perspective. You can learn to see and appreciate the good in life without giving up your ability to discern what is truly negative and unacceptable in the present. Somatic healing. Trauma takes its toll on the body in many ways. We need to comprehend the physical damage that CPT wreaks on our bodies to motivate us to adopt practices that help us to heal on this level. Most of the physiological damage of extended trauma occurs because we are forced to spend so much time in hyperarousal, stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. When we are chronically stressed out, stuck in sympathetic nervous system activation, detrimental somatic changes become ingrained in our bodies. Here are some of the most common examples of body-harming reactions to CPTSD stress. Hypervigilance, shallow and incomplete breathing, constant adrenalization, armoring, chronic muscle tightness, wear and tear from rushing and armoring, inability to be fully present, relaxed, and grounded in our bodies, sleep problems from being overactivated, digestive disorders from a tightened digestive tract, physiological damage from excessive self-medication with alcohol, food, or drugs. Moreover, in the case of physical and sexual abuse, our capacities to be physically comforted by touch are eliminated or compromised. And in cases of verbal and emotional abuse, our capacities to be comforted by eye and voice contact are underdeveloped or seriously diminished. Somatic self-help. The good news is that some somatic repair happens automatically. When we reduce our physiological stress by more efficient flashback management. Particularly potent help also comes from the grieving work of reclaiming the ability to cry self-compassionately and to express anger self-protectively. Both processes can release armoring, promote embodiment, improve sleep, decrease hyperarousal, and encourage deeper and more rhythmic breathing. Without further expressly somatic work, however, a fully relaxed inhabitancy of our body